In the late 1930s, the Soviet leadership was watching Europe change at an alarming pace. Armies were modernizing, doctrines were evolving, and the nature of war itself was shifting from static trench lines to fast-moving, mechanized violence. The lessons of earlier conflicts were clear. Mobility, armor, and firepower would define the next war. But inside the Soviet Union, the reality was more complicated. Purges had weakened military leadership, industrial systems were still developing, and the country faced the constant pressure of preparing for a conflict that seemed inevitable, yet impossible to predict. Out of this tension, a design philosophy began to take shape, one that did not aim to create the most advanced machine in the world, but the most effective one under brutal conditions. Engineers and planners did not ask how to build the perfect tank. They asked how to build one that could survive mud, snow, mechanical abuse, and still be produced in massive numbers. The result was the T-34, a machine that at first glance did not seem revolutionary. It was not the heaviest, nor the most technologically complex. But beneath its surface was a series of decisions that would change the course of mechanized warfare. The sloped armor was one of those decisions. Instead of relying purely on thickness, the armor was angled in a way that increased its effective strength while reducing weight. This meant shells were more likely to deflect, giving the tank a level of protection that surprised those who encountered it. Its wide tracks allowed it to move across terrain that would immobilize other vehicles, particularly in the deep mud and snow that defined much of the Eastern Front. And its diesel engine, less prone to catastrophic fires than gasoline engines, gave it a degree of reliability and survivability that became crucial in prolonged engagements. Yet, in 1941, when Operation Barbarossa began, the T-34 was not deployed as a fully realized instrument of war. Many crews were poorly trained, coordination was limited, and communication systems were often inadequate. When German forces first encountered the T-34, it created confusion and alarm. Standard anti-tank weapons struggled against its armor. Its mobility allowed it to appear where it was least expected. But these advantages were not yet fully exploited. The early months of the invasion were catastrophic for the Soviet Union, and thousands of tanks, including T-34s, were lost in the chaos. At that moment, the T-34 was not yet a symbol of victory. It was a machine caught in the middle of a collapsing front, part of an army struggling to survive an invasion that threatened to end the Soviet state itself. As the war deepened, the Soviet Union began to change in ways that were both visible and invisible. Entire were relocated eastward, beyond the reach of advancing German forces. Factories were dismantled, transported, and rebuilt under extreme conditions. Production lines were simplified, designs were adjusted, and every aspect of manufacturing was reevaluated with a single goal in mind: output. The T-34 became central to this effort, not just as a weapon, but as a unit of industrial survival. The design of the T-34 allowed for rapid production in ways that more complex machines could not match. Components were simplified where possible, tolerances were adjusted, and aesthetic refinement was sacrificed for speed. What emerged was not a perfect machine, but a practical one that could be built quickly, repaired in the field, and returned to combat with minimal delay. It became, in many ways, an extension of the Soviet industrial system itself. By the time the war reached turning points, such as the Battle of Stalingrad, the presence of the T-34 had grown significantly. It was no longer rare or surprising. It was everywhere. Waves of these tanks began to shape the battlefield, not always through superior individual performance, but through sheer presence and persistence. German forces, which had initially been shocked by the tank's capabilities, adapted quickly. New weapons and tactics were introduced to counter it, including more powerful anti-tank guns and improved armor vehicles. But adaptation did not erase the problem. Every T-34 destroyed could be replaced, often faster than German industry could replace its own losses. The battlefield became a contest not just of tactics, but of endurance, of which system could sustain pressure over time. The Soviet Union, through a combination of centralized control, and relentless industrial effort began to shift that balance. Inside the tank, however, the reality was far from heroic. Crews operated in cramped, often uncomfortable conditions. Visibility was limited, communication could be unreliable, and survival depended as much on luck as on design. The T-34 was effective, but it demanded a great deal from the people who operated it. It was not a machine that protected its crew perfectly. It was a machine that increased the odds just enough to matter in a war where margins were often thin. By the later stages of World War II, the T-34 had undergone further evolution. Improvements were made to its armament, leading to variants like the T-34-85, which carried a more powerful gun capable of engaging newer German tanks on more equal terms. These changes reflected an ongoing process of adaptation, where the machine was continuously adjusted in response to the realities of the battlefield. What had begun as a response to anticipated threats had become a defining element of Soviet offensive power. As the Red Army moved westward, pushing back German forces, the T-34 was at the forefront of that advance. It was no longer reacting, it was driving the momentum of the war. Columns of these tanks rolled through territories that had once been occupied, marking a reversal that had seemed impossible in the early years of the conflict. The significance of the T-34 was not just in its technical features, but in what it represented. It embodied a particular approach to warfare, one that prioritized balance over extremes, production over perfection, and resilience over specialization. It showed that a machine did not need to be the best in every category to be decisive. It needed to exist in sufficient numbers, perform reliably under harsh conditions, and integrate into a broader system capable of sustaining prolonged conflict. After the war, the influence of the T-34 extended far beyond the battlefields where it had fought. Its design principles informed future tank development, and its reputation became part of a larger narrative about how wars are won, not by a single breakthrough or a single superior machine, but by the alignment of industry, strategy, and human endurance. In the end, the T-34 was not just a tank. It was a reflection of a system under extreme pressure, a machine shaped by necessity rather than ambition, and a reminder that in the harshest conditions, effectiveness is often defined not by perfection, but by survival and persistence.